Oh my goodness. So, Reverend Kurt here. We're talking about grace. Living by Grace is the title of this series that we're doing in November. And this morning we're looking at the grace of choosing. The kind of subhead that we've had on this, because it has been, let's face it, this 2020 has been kind of challenging. And there's been a lot to kind of overcome. But I think we're at a space now where the whole universe is conspiring to have us maybe rest in a little bit and move out of struggling and into allowing. As the days get darker earlier, it seems like there's just a beautiful opportunity for us to settle in and allow the power of grace to be more accessible to us. Because grace is always there, right? It's not like God's grace ever goes anywhere. It's whether or not we're open to it and whether or not we're aware of it and whether or not we're stepping into it. So that's what I want to talk about this morning, that moment of choice that we have in any situation to really call forth and rely on and rest on the power of grace that allows us to move forward in beautiful and loving ways, more productive and fruitful and joyful ways. So that's what we're about. I want to start with a beautiful quote I found from, this is from a Catholic nun. Her name is Stanislaus Kennedy. She's Irish, and she's done a huge amount of work in supporting the homeless there. But this particular quote is more about, more related to the idea that it's up to us to kind of choose to allow grace into our lives. She writes, "Grace empowers us to choose rightly in what seems to be the most choiceless of situations, but it does not and will not determine that choice. So while grace is a gift from God, the power of grace flows more fully when we choose to act in harmony with the divine will. In practical terms, this means staying in a situation, being willing to confront it as it is, remaining responsible for the choice one makes in response to it, while at the same time returning to God's grace, protection, and guidance as the ground for one's choices and behavior." I love that. She speaks so beautifully to mostly the idea that the choice is really ours, right? In any situation, we have the choice about how we respond to it. Maybe not what's happening in the situation, but we choose how we respond to it and what we're going to do to overcome it or confront it or be with it or allow it, whatever it is. That choice is up to us. And I was thinking about, this sort of grace is almost an energy or a power that we just live and move in. It's like a fish in a sea. We are immersed in this wonderful capacity to experience grace, but we don't always avail of ourselves of it. And the image I got, I'm going to share my screen here and show you the image that came to mind when I was thinking about this. Most of you are going to recognize this, right? That's the concourse between the Terminal A or Terminal 1, United Terminal. When you're going underground, you're going to get your flight, you've already checked in, you're going through the concourse and you're going out to the terminals. You remember that? I mean, it's been around a long, long time. But if you think about just how beautiful that is, I mean, the play of lights, there is so much movement. This doesn't really capture it because it's a still picture, and I did find some videos, but they didn't do it either. But I want you to think about, most of us, I think, have probably been through that corridor. And I want you to think about what it's been like for you moving through that. Because even if you've been there a number of times, there may be times when you were running late for a flight and you were just getting through it. You didn't hear the music. All you were focused on is whether or not you're going to do a phase plan at the end of the walkway. It's like you were just moving through and getting the piece. Even though the beauty and the light and sort of the creativity that artist brought to that space was available to you. You could avail yourself to it of any time, and yet sometimes we're not aware of it. There are other times, I can remember as a kid, I came through it, I must have been like in 7th or 8th grade, the first time that I went through that corridor. And it was just wonder, I was just fascinated by all of it and the shifting of colors and the rainbow that happens. And it really is a gorgeous, I think, beautiful space that illustrates how grace is accessible to us, depending on how available we are to be willing to let it in, to see it, to recognize it, to remember that it's there for us to enjoy, that it's there for us to impart on. So I want you to hold that as kind of an image. It's always there. There's no mistaking it. You walk in that corridor and you are, I don't want to say assaulted because that's the wrong energy, but immersed certainly in the beauty of that space. And it really is, I still find it a magical and kind of sacred place whenever I'm through it. I know we're not traveling much these days, but most of us have been through it enough that you can have an image of that and know that kind of energy is exactly sort of a visual representation of what the energy of God's grace is like around us in every moment. Yeah? So it's about whether or not we have the awareness or the willingness or the fortitude to choose to allow that grace into our lives. And I think I want to look at an example, a biblical example there are a lot of characters in the Bible who make good choices, who are wise. But the one probably that stands out most is the character of King Solomon. It's a beautiful story, and I'm going to just kind of recap a little bit of it. And what I would invite you into is look at not so much the details of the story, but the dynamics that move Solomon into being able to make the kinds of choices that are viewed as wise these many, many, many centuries later. Yes? So Solomon was born sort of blessed by God. And he was born out of tragedy in some ways. His father and mother were King David and Bathsheba. And you remember that they had a child out of wedlock, out of adultery, that God killed, God took from them. And as sort of a peace offering, Solomon was born, a peace offering between God and between David. So throughout his life, Solomon always had this kind of blessed capacity for grace and for wisdom. He had 6 older brothers, all of whom were contenders for the throne. And yet Solomon was, in his lifetime, was supported not only by Bathsheba and his mother, but another prophet named Nathan, who were really pushing that he be named king, that he become David's successor. And that eventually transpires, and it transpires with all of the sort of competing energies of these older brothers who also would have had that throne. So very quickly, Solomon had the wisdom to vanquish his opponents. And this is Old Testament, right? So that means kill. We wouldn't necessarily go that in these days, but it's like in metaphysical terminology, that's really eliminating the thoughts or the obstructions that would hold us from being able to fully embody our divinity, right? So God is so pleased with the way in which Solomon has ascended to the throne and taken charge of the kingdom that he comes to Solomon and he says, I'll grant you one wish. Whatever you want, I will grant that. That will be that blessing is yours. And Solomon was not he was not as confident maybe of his skill level as you might expect. And so he didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for power, he didn't ask for glory, he didn't ask for women or song or material pleasure. What he asked for, and most of us will know this, is wisdom. That was his one request. And of course God grants him greater wisdom than any man on earth had ever had. And with that wisdom, because he was so wise in choosing that as the priority to be able to serve his people well, he also got the money and the power and the women. So there's a message in there for us, like as we choose the highest and best for all, it's not about our own desires, but it's about how we're moving through community, that we really do step into a space where grace supports us in being successful at whatever we're looking for. So that's sort of the first demonstration of it. The way that wisdom sort of got communicated to the broader kingdom was in a choice that Solomon made when he was asked to decide which of 2 mothers was the true mother of this child who had survived. You remember this, there were 2 women who had children. We don't know where their fathers were. Some say they might have been prostitutes, but whatever. They were in the same house. They both had a child at the same time, and one of the children dies. Well, the mother of the dead child swapped kids so that when the mother of the live child woke up, she recognized that something was off here, and it turned into a big conflict, a big legal conflict that ultimately King David is asked to resolve. He, not knowing these women, not knowing the situation, he didn't know how to decide for this, but he knew enough to be curious. He knew enough to ask really salient questions. He knew enough to sort of create an environment out of which greater wisdom could emerge. And so he asked for a sword, and he asked one of his attendants to slice the child in half and give each mother a half of the child's body. That was going to be how they resolve it. Well, the mother who had done the switch, the mother whose child really had died, was fine with that agreement. And there are all sorts of, I know that sounds really weird in our context, but historically there's all sorts of weird motivations that happen socially and culturally that make that not as crazy unreasonable as it sounds like to our 21st century ears. So, but know that was a possibility, right? And she was okay with it. The other mother was willing to give up the child to the mother who was claiming it under false pretenses in order that the child would survive. right? And so that's how David knew, or that's how Solomon knew exactly which of the two mothers was the true mother and warded it. So that story sort of became known throughout the kingdom, and his wisdom became renowned throughout the kingdom, and his wealth grew. Another story that sort of illustrates the same capacity to be curious, the same capacity to resist that urge when we're looking to answer a question, to like reach for the easy answer or reach for the answer that we think in our human awareness is the highest and best, right? And that's a story where Bathsheba, his wife, had brought him 2 bouquets of flowers. One of these bouquets was real, and one of them was artificial. And she was challenging him to decide which one was real. And he couldn't. They were very similar in look and feel, and he wasn't able to. And so he ordered the windows of the palace opened, and in through the window 2 bees came. And the bees, of course, were attracted to the real bouquet. And so that's how he determined the real bouquet. So what I'm suggesting is that as we move into those spaces where maybe we're aware that grace might be around us, but we're not really connecting with it, we're not really allowing it, we're not really being present to it, that's a huge space to be able to pause, to open a window, and to maybe let greater wisdom and guidance sort of emerge. Answers do come as we allow space for grace to express itself, yeah? So I just want to talk a little bit more about, so that, I mean, he's a model for it. Curiosity is a huge piece. Being able to pull back from our own agendas and allow from a deeper sense of being for deeper wisdom to be revealed is a piece of it. But how we do that in the midst of stuff, you know? So yesterday, we in Chicago area, we're going back into a stay-at-home advisory tomorrow. So yesterday I found myself out shopping, and the first time around, I didn't do a lot of the stockpiling that I think many people sort of were afraid of. This time around, I'm finding that I'm in a different energy. I was out before, but mostly I was curious about what other people were doing, and I didn't really get into the stashing toilet paper. So it wasn't really a thing for me this time, but when I was out shopping, what I realized is that I was caught up in that same kind of energy. Like, oh man, I'm going to be stuck home for a month. I got to have everything I need for the next month. I have never been to Home Depot when it was busier. The lines at Home Depot were amazing. You know, I've got the projects of things that I want to complete during this month next home, and so I was there with my list, and I lost my list, and I'm running around. And it wasn't until I was able to sort of look around and realize that, oh my gosh, I'm not really allowing at this point. I'm pushing. I'm struggling. I'm pushing against. I've got my agenda about how this is going to go down. And that is what I recognize as one of those choice points, right? I can let go of my agenda. I can sort of be present to, wow, I really am kind of caught up in the anxiousness and the level of fear that's going to be happening around all the COVID numbers that are escalating. And I think that's certainly it's bubbling in collective consciousness, but I think it's bubbling within all of us at a level that we might not necessarily be aware of. But it is shaping how available we make ourselves to the power of grace and God. So I wanted to dig a little bit into what Charles Fillmore might have said about how we do that, right? It's one thing to recognize that, okay, I'm now being led by sort of material forces and earthly forces, rather than really allowing the grace of God to sort of guide my decision making and guide my experience through this process. And so I went back to Charles. One of my favorite books of his is Atom Smashing Power of Mind, and found a couple of quotes that I think give us some instruction about how it is that we can, like King Solomon, really avail ourselves of this capacity for grace. So again, it's in Atom Smashing Power of Mind that Charles advises this. He says, every problem of life can be solved if we begin with the use of the I am. I am is all in caps, right? I am is like divine presence. I am is like grace of God. If we begin with that level, that energy on the various planes of mind. And then he goes on to clarify, which I love because Vivian did this beautifully in her prayer just a moment ago. It is not we alone. You know, the I am is not about me, Kurt, in the physical body, in the physical realm. The I am, it's not that we are alone in that. It's when we realize that we can connect ourselves with the Father mind, with divine mind, with grace, with the cosmos, whatever it is that you use to invoke or call forth the divine in your own practice and practices, and prove what Jesus said. Quote, I speak not from myself, but the Father abiding in me doeth his works, right? That's grace. The Father abiding in me that's doing the work, the allowing that happens when we're open to it. And that's when the potential of our almightiness begins to appear, right? I love that. The potential of our almightiness doesn't arise from us, from our own thinking, from me running around Home Depot trying to find the lighting section, the lighting solution I wanted, right? It comes and sort of allowing and being present to the fullness of this experience, to know that in this, even in this, there is the grace of God to support me in continuing to develop new kinds of connections, continuing to meet new, amazing, fabulous musicians who can inspire us on our Sunday service, right? We stay open, we stay curious about how grace will make itself manifest in us, and things begin to change. And spirit begins to change things. They don't just change on their own. So then this is the other piece I wanted to share from Charles. So once it is that we're coming from that space, once we're doing our work, once we're conscious and curious about how grace can support us and we're allowing it to happen, then he says, that's the part that we're done. You have done your part when your true word has gone forth. Now rest at the center and say, it is well, thy work is sure, I am satisfied. And here's the piece that I especially like, that I think is especially salient for us now, in this culture, in this political time, in this framework environment. Do not argue with anyone, nor discuss the matters that you have submitted to Spirit. Simply say, all is well, it is finished, right? So that we become sort of the point from which grace then can emerge from others, rather than imposing our own point of view on those who disagree with us, rather than getting upset and anxious about what we're going to be doing around Thanksgiving because our plans may have to change now, right? Simply allow and know that space that we have made to be curious about divine answers sort of coming into our expression, that work is done. And now ours is to rest in that. So I love that this is all kind of happening as the days are getting shorter, as the universe is really, as I said before, encouraging us to move into a space of peace and to move into a space of being quiet and reflective and really waiting for light to emerge. And actually, as I've been working with ideas, I think that might be a big part of what happens when we move in December and getting ready for Christmas. As we wait for the light, that might be even the series title. But we will move through these next few weeks in a way that really is open and receptive to allowing grace to express more fully in the little decisions of our lives and in the big experiences of sort of collective consciousness. And each of us, is equipped to do that work. We are sort of the grace of God expressing in the world and on the planet. And I know that because I know us. So what I'd like to do now is move into maybe a time of meditation. And I'm assuming it is, the imagery that happens in that corridor at the first terminal out at United, what I'd like to do is imagine that you've just descended on the escalators and you've entered that corridor at one end. And I'm just wanting us to make ourselves available to the energy and power, and to know that that's just kind of a visual representation of the power of grace and the energy of God that's around us all the time. So let's just begin to sort of call forth that image of you moving into that corridor as we prepare now for a time of meditation.
So you think in this world you're alone, and there's no place on earth you can call your own, seeking all those reasons to make peaceful days.
And imagine yourself in this beautiful sacred corridor where the energy of the divine is all around you. Imagine that you can feel it physically against your skin. There's sort of an electricity in the air that vibrates, that enlivens you. Imagine that every breath you breathe in sort of refreshes and renews that sense of energy, and know that is indeed the source of the cosmos. That is the building blocks of the universe. As we breathe in, we become one with it. Know that every sound you hear, every scent that you smell, everything you see is a part of this great and beautiful cosmic wholeness. And it's ever available to us, no matter what's going on. As we turn within and become available and open our hearts and minds, that we can remember that we are intimately connected to everything, to all that is. It creates in us a capacity to be fully present to it. Fully present and fully receptive. That this wonderful energy is really the gift of God's grace into our lives. And we have the opportunity to experience it at every level of being. And once we've experienced it, once we've embraced it, once we've immersed ourselves in it, what happens is we begin to open and allow it to exude from us, so that we become the grace of God, that same energy expressing in the world. That we become a channel through which greater good is attracted into our experience, like King Solomon. And at the same time, we become sort of a center through which it is broadcast out in waves to the broader world. Truly, we are the grace of God as we allow ourselves to receive it and to give it. So I invite you now to rest for just a moment in this beautiful energy of grace. I invite you to open your heart and be curious about how it's expressing in your current experience, right here, right now. What are the sensations? What are the images? What are the thoughts that are invoked as you stand in this space of being grace? And so now I invite you to fully aware that grace is all around you, that you are grace, fully aware of those beautiful energies that are immersing and uplifting us. To return our attention now to this time and place. And Holy Spirit, gracious God, we're so grateful for the opportunity to join together in this community, in this virtual experience, that we might share our understanding of the power we have to effect change, to bring love, to be the power of grace in all that we do and all that we experience. Thank you, God, for this and so much more. And so it is, and so we let it be. Amen.
Two methods for living, and he gave us a vision to see that we can't go on living selfishly. If the words in the speech were unclear, we must turn from the river of fear and doubt, knowing that we're paving the way to peace peaceful days.
Hey, thanks for watching this YouTube video. If Unity's message of positive spiritual living resonates with you, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on other lessons as we post them. Also, if you're able to support us financially in the work that we do in the world, please check below for contact information. You can visit our website, find more about what programming we offer, as well as how to give. Blessings.